Oh, Mr. Kyle Beachy, what an immense pleasure it is, hello, to have you on the Podstack.
Mm,
So named by the very first guest,
mm.
who is weirdly, who is actually, who, this is like a full circle thing, who's teaching at Pomona. One of your essays mentions being
It's
at,
Lethem. It's Lethem. It's
it's
Jonathan.
Lethem. It's
Yeah, yeah.
Lethem. Yeah, so it's so cool to have you on here. It's just like a threading of so many needles. I'm really
Mm,
excited to be talking about your latest, The Most Fun Thing, a phenomenal collection of essays about the life, just like not just the life of Kyle Beachy, right? But like life, full stop, skateboarding, how the
mm,
two inform each other. We're gonna talk about like the Geist of shredding,
mm.
Kyle, and I'm very excited to talk
I'm
about.
thrilled. I'm thrilled. I'm your guy.
Oh
Yeah.
God, you deeply are. Such a great book. And like I can't emphasize enough how much this book is like it's a great point of access to skateboarding for like the
Mm,
non-skater, which is like really, really deeply me. I don't have your athletic ability, but it's also like it's just like such a great point of access just to really like beautiful and sincere and like well examined like life writing, like writing about the
mm.
experience of like just being who you are. It's great. I mean, creative nonfiction is a term that kind of encapsulates that, but yeah, I love this book. And for those of you who do not know about Kyle or this great book, I'm going to give you a little bit of a bio here. Mr. Kyle Beachy is a novelist and essayist living in New Mexico. His memoir and essays, The Most Fun Thing, which came out from Grand Central in 2021, was named a best book of 2021 by NPR and Electric Lit, and is almost certainly the only book to be excerpted in both Thrasher magazine and the Paris Review. That's almost certainly the case. Yeah. We haven't fact checked that, but I feel comfortable not doing that right now.
Small sample size. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm,
Oh, the N is tiny. His first novel, The Slide, which came out from Dial in 2009, was the Chicago Reader's Choice for Best Book by a Chicago author in 2009. After 20 years in academia, he now teaches independently and works one-on-one with clients as an editorial consultant. Please hire Kyle to do that.
mm.
I'll hire you, Kyle, to consult with
Great.
me editorially. I would love that, honestly. Okay, cool. Well, Kyle, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and
Yeah.
read us an excerpt from The Most Fun Thing.
I will. Thank you for obviously thank you for having me. This is wonderful. I mean, the spoiler, the curtain pullback as we've been chatting for the last half hour. It's just been such a joy. So I'm really, really happy to be here. By way of introduction, all I want to say is that the assignment for this essay or article that I'm reading from was to follow along with a young skater who came into the world of skateboarding as a real like wunderkind child, and in his 20s kind of released a video part that was more mature. And so I spent the day with him in Chicago, and it was surreal. This is part two. Tell us who you hang with, and we'll tell you who you are. We left the luxury apartment inside of a blacked out 2017 Jeep Grand Cherokee, the sort of car I don't imagine comes from a regular dealership. It was the tail end of February and an impossibly pleasant 65 degrees in Chicago. We were on our way to say hello to a friend who was in town, whose name Chaz said, but I didn't hear, and then we were to go skating. I basically made him promise me that we would in fact go skating. We moved beneath the tracks on Lake Street and then to Wacker Drive along the river. Musically, it would be trap all day long. Chaz drove his luxury Jeep like he was not quite convinced by the theory of consequence, the way I would have driven if I hadn't ever really fucked up along the way. In the Posh River North Entertainment District, we stopped at the curb to stare into a restaurant with a wall of open windows. The friend we were looking for was the rapper Machine Gun Kelly, who just happened that week to hold the current number one spot in the Billboard pop song charts. Do you see him in there? Asked Chaz. But I did not want to admit that I had no idea what Machine Gun Kelly looked like, so I pretended to be real busy with my notebook. Actually, Machine Gun Kelly was at a different spot, which, when we arrived, was packed full of people dressed a good, healthy leap beyond my profession. Chaz was in a hooded Zoo York windbreaker, what I believed were Zoo York twill Brooklyn pants, and Adidas Boost runners. The upstairs level, we were told, was at capacity. Weird, I thought, and indulged a nice sustained rotation, taking in the banquettes along the wall, the pulsing daytime lights reflected in walls of mirror, the chevrons on the ceiling. At this point, I realized we were in a nightclub. For 10 minutes, we waited in line, something I sensed that neither Chaz Ortiz nor I was used to, though for very different reasons. After a moment, the music went silent and a voice came over the speakers calling for a bottle of Patron to Machine Gun Kelly's table. The cheers rained down, and I saw Chaz get a little antsy. Soon, though, we were ushered past the rope and up the stairs while the rest of the line discovered new ways to hate. I had to keep my eye on Chaz here because I was totally fucking baffled by this place. In person, Machine Gun Kelly looked like a wizard or high level mage, and his two very strong friends in tight t shirts were not the sort of fellas I normally hang with. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was shouldering between men with perfect cuticles and very white teeth, women who generally did not see me, and a server holding aloft a flaming sparkler. On the way to MGK's table, we had to keep stopping so Chaz could be the valuable part of someone else's selfie. And the table, actually, was a couch on stage behind the DJ booth. A guard wearing an earpiece eyed me as I climbed up there, and at this point, I'm going to skip a whole lot of material so that I can report the primary takeaway of my time on stage with Chaz, which is this. Once you are up there on stage, it is almost impossible to be unhappy. I mean this. I awoke the next morning embroiled in what had become a kind of standard, sustained funk born of, well, a number of factors. Where were those feelings on stage? Who cares? Once you are on stage, the world shrinks. There was no global warming, no creeping advancement of a new American fascism. Beers arrived and had fruit in them. The people beneath me were dancing, and they were obviously beneath me. If I made eye contact, I would have seen a keen awareness in their eyes, like a reverse glimmer. I was up there. They were not. Who are you? They would wonder. What had I accomplished? What victory or deceit had I pulled off to be standing up there with a billboard rap star and actor? Machine Gun Kelly was dancing on top of the couch wearing a $700 tank top and some of the least likely jeans in the history of denim. Chaz was calmly next to me, seemingly accustomed to all this. I walked over to the bottle of Patron as if it were mine, as if I'd shorn the thorns of the agave plant's leaves with a machete. I poured around, and every one of my new peers on stage took one, and we were the luckiest people alive. I'll stop there.
Oh, I love it. I love it so much. God, it's
Thank
like
you. Thank you.
I mean, Kyle, I don't know if I need John McCain's campaign bus. I think I just need Chaz Ortiz's. It's such like it's such, I mean, it's gonzo, it's droll, it's also just and it's funny as hell, but it's also
Mm,
like you are having, I don't know, I'm gonna bypass my first question because I just want to ask you a question about the like reportage you did for Thrasher and stuff.
hmm
Because, you know, there are several such essays in this book, right, where you're kind of following a skater or you're writing about a skater, right?
Yeah.
And these are essays that are kind of like bundled into the broader memoir project that are more journalistic, right? But
Yeah.
there are no less like, I don't know, like rich with self-disclosure. And I think this
Mm.
Chaz Ortiz essay is a phenomenal example of that. Um, I love the part where you come home to, your wife and you're like, my head is spinning. Like I just with this, in this entirely different world. And so, um, I'm just, I love like the tone you strike in those too. And I'm really curious, like, how did, like the reporting you did, right? And the more journalistic writing, how did you find that kind of squaring with the more like deliberately,
Yeah.
yeah, the well, not first person, but the personal essay.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And maybe the best way to answer is to start by saying that this stuff wasn't in Thrasher, right? This stuff is
Hmm.
very not the kind of material that Thrasher would publish. The
Oh, okay.
piece of me that was in Thrasher was an excerpt from the book. That wasn't that.
Okay.
Skateboarding doesn't have really, well, first of all, skateboarding doesn't really have journalism, right? That's one of the claims of the book is that it's actually a whole lot of trade magazines that are driven by the very same interests that buy the advertising and so on. So there's no real critical built-in conversation about skateboarding within the media of skateboarding. So in order to do this kind of writing, a new website started in around 2010 called Jenkem Magazine. Jenkem
Okay.
being a famous kind of, I'll let you look it up, whoever wants to. but it's, the spirit there was rooted deeply in skateboarding's kind of recklessness and tongue-in-cheekedness, right? It's like this sort of deviant, humor-driven magazine. But I got on them very early to try to let me do some more sort of thoughtful essays.
Mm,
Um, and in all of those essays, I kind of realized now looking back, what I was trying to do was basically write to skateboarders in such a way that helps skateboarders realize that the thing they were doing, that the thing they love, that the thing they've necessarily had to give a lot of themselves to in order to do it in a serious way actually has charged them with all of this thoughtfulness and all of these like pro-social behaviors that maybe they hadn't realized yet,
mm,
right? Like, the basic equation was like, you love skateboarding. That means you're capable of love. That means that you're maybe not the piece of shit that people tell you you are.
yeah.
And so a lot of the essays like this Chaz Ortiz one were really trying to show that even just trafficking in the language of celebrity, our skateboarding's own language of celebrity, which is a little different, um, one would find oneself if you kind of get in there and look close enough, you're brushing against some kind of important questions about access, questions about power differentials, questions about wealth, questions about what motivates us to try to do these very hard things that we do on skateboards, like all of this stuff. So for me, all of that was like really, really swirly in anything that I wrote about skateboarding. I wanted to just make very clear, look at this, like look closely, like don't take this thing for granted. When you say you love this, you are saying actually you love these other things. Um, so yeah, I think that that probably gets at it. I was trying to kind of it was a kind of pedagogy and it was a kind of like undercover trying to speak to people I know are sometimes resistant to overt lessons, and try to get in there and sort of model like, hey, we can be this too. Skaters can be thoughtful.
Yeah.
We can do this.
I love that like self-love via syllogism, right? It's
Mm.
like, take
Hmm.
out, if A then B, if B then C, take out the B. It's like
Yeah.
if you love skateboarding and you really dedicate your life and time to it the way that that skateboarding asks you to, you are not a piece of shit. And
Yeah.
that's not only like I think a very beautiful project, but it comes through very clearly in the
Mm.
book. And actually leads in really conveniently to my next question. Which I'm just gonna read this thing. It's like a whole friggin' paragraph. So the most fun thing is among many wonderful things, an excavation of skateboarding as a creative practice. Even the super uninitiated or uncoordinated reader will come away from this fantastic memoir and essays with a loose sense of skateboarding's history, both Chronos and Kairos. Sorry guys with all the double the double major philosophy and English stuff, but it's going to happen in this interview. Apologies.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so both its sort of various senses of time, right, and its politics, which are broadly anti-authority, anti-hierarchy, anti-corporate, and pro-core, which I'm sure
Mm.
Kyle can explain more about what core is to us. Um, but so like you kind of describe all of this, but then you give yourself a task that I think has not been attempted before, although you would know better than I. You task yourself with establishing like a poetics of skateboarding.
Mm.
And you get at and you kind of like describe this poetics at various points in the book. And I'm just wondering, like, for the purposes of this interview, can you tell us what is the poetics of skateboarding, according to Kyle Beachy?
Sure, I can. Well, I mean, no, I can't. I can't do that. What I can say is that the kind of second half of your question there, your modes of derivation, like it was a 10-year project of writing this book, right? Like
Yeah.
the cop out answer here is the actual one, which is
Sure.
the thing itself is the thing.
Yeah.
One of the reasons it took 10 years to get at it, is that skateboarding, I think, fundamentally is a slippery object, right? It has a lot of qualities of, the term I use in the book is bothnesses, that there are these very real, and you could frame these as dialectics, right? Between stasis and motion, between creation and destruction, if you wanted. But for me, the main takeaway there is it's really all these things at once. It's also a deeply private relationship, right? Like my relationship to skateboarding is not the same as someone else's relationship to skateboarding. There are people for whom it is a pathway to all sorts of ends that for me, those ends have never even been a factor, right? For me, it is a means-based practice. It is the thing that I continue to do simply so that I can continue doing the thing. I never have made money from it. I've never had ambitions to make money from it. There is no deliverable, right? It really is just a practice. So, with all that said, the thing you're able to do in the 2020s is look at basically a 70-year history of skateboarding. Like it's been around for a long time. While at the same time, like there was a time not so long ago before it existed, right? It is both an American invention, but something that there are people who are alive who were there at its inception.
Mhm.
So we have a history we can study. We can look at the key inflection points when new technologies changed the way the activity was actually practiced. The big one there being the invention of polyurethane wheels, so you can actually grip surfaces instead of having clay wheels. So there's some technology that comes into it, and this, that, and the other. The other thing I'll say is that because I was for years a professor of literature and creative writing, I also brought like the tactics of comparative close reading lit to this. So I watched some certain films very, very closely that seemed to me to give us something more. All of this is to say that the poetics of skateboarding are fundamentally materialistic. It is an engagement with the surfaces around us. It is an embodied practice that is, in some key ways, very exclusive, right? There's the ableism that you kind of gestured to earlier. There's also the fact that the distinctions between movements are so nuanced and hyper technical that it pushes away kind of a lay understanding of it, right? I mean, people who aren't skaters can see like, oh wow, spectacular airs and spins. But the practitioner viewer watches it with a totally different eye. So there is this sort of reciprocity of performer and audience that feels to me particularly meaningful. And then, beyond that, it's a practice of kind of appropriating capital's underbelly, right? I mean, the skateboard is to ride a skateboard is to find yourself interested in the castaway spaces, the empty parking lots, the grime of dirt, and so on. None of which of this long-winded answer really gets at what the poetics are, but it does give you a sense maybe of like why it's challenging. And the basic one, back to that exclusivity question, is that for a long time it's just kind of been dismissed. It's like this silly fad. It's like the yo-yo, but not. It's like the hula hoop, but not. And so the sort of basic fundamental exclusivity of taking the frivolous, silly thing too seriously. My practice was I'm going to go ahead and give myself permission to think of this as seriously as I've thought of anything, and just really stop questioning, silence that nagging voice, which is like, but isn't it just a toy? Isn't it just a toy? Because yes, and it's this other thing.
Well, right. And I think it's like, I mean, I think one of the things I love so much about even like the more technical aspects of of your sort of journalistic writing and skateboarding, it's like it feels like you are taking fun seriously, and that is fun. That doesn't make it any less fun, right? It's like I think it's like there's it's almost like you are kind of pushing back against what makes sports sport. I don't know what you're saying, but like
Yeah.
sports, like the games, right? The game that is a pickup game of whatever, soccer, basketball, right? When that's formalized
Yeah.
as like athletics, right? It actually really stops being fun, and it becomes.
Right.
I think like the kind of like the anti-hierarchy, the anti-competition, right? The sort of the almost like the pro entropy right? I don't know that I
Mhm.
feel like skateboarding takes it's like, and even when boarders go pro,
Yeah.
it's so different.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of this is also just about a fundamental kind of impulse toward quantifying, right? I mean, with the sort of analogy that I think that I use, so a few of these essays are more deliberately about like the project of Toward a Poetics, right? One of them is actually called Toward a Poetics of Skateboarding. And the analogy I make there is that like, look, if you and I go out to a basketball court and we just shoot around, we might be doing something basketball like, but we're not playing basketball, right? In order to play basketball, we need to play defense. We need to have timeouts. We need to respect that when the ball goes out of bounds, play stops, and all these things we don't do when we're just out there having fun.
Mhm.
Um, Whereas with skateboarding, there is no sort of rigid, clear distinction between the thing and then the competition or the formalized version of the thing. Like,
Sure.
even as it's an Olympic sport, like skateboarding continues to change its formats.
Yeah.
It is ridiculous to try to give a score to a skateboard trick. It is ridiculous. It's not the same. And this is a key thing. It's not the same as like a particular kind of dive from a 3 meter platform with a particular kind of difficulty or like gymnastics with the pommel horse. Like the ways that you kind of find analogs, you start realizing like actually in skateboarding that doesn't apply. Like for
Right.
some people, certain moves are easier than for others. There are these two totally different ways to stand on the board. Like there are constantly, the second you try to nail it in as, well, it's like this, it kind of wriggles its way out and it says, well, actually, it's not like that. It's this totally other thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like I'm sorry, I've got a lot of planes flying overhead, so let me shift to these. Um,
Oh, no, that's great. I respect you for that.
Thank you. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I feel like I mean, I feel kind of what comes to mind too, right? Like when you say it feels insane to assign a score to like sort of like a skate trick, a skate performance, right?
Hmm.
But the very first thing I thought of was like, it feels insane to assign a dollar value to a novel.
Yeah.
Of course, you and I both agree on that. So like, it's that kind of the impossibility of quantification, and then also just like there's almost like sort of like the skate ethos, the skate mentality being so anti quantification, right? And being so, I mean, I almost got this kind of like you never step on the same board twice vibe, right? Where you're like,
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
in whatever Ontario or whatever. My friend told me he would meet me in the late afternoon to skate,
Yeah.
and I just have to be okay with the fact that maybe
Yeah.
it will happen. Maybe it won't happen until 4 p.m. Maybe it
Right.
will, won't happen right. And so like there's almost like a when you like the skate ethos feels like it's like about letting go of outcomes, and I could be wrong about that, but like I wonder how that how that relates to what appealed to me immensely about the poetics thing is redefining space, right? Like
Hmm.
we'll take
Hmm.
this hostile architecture and we'll make it as friendly as possible.
Right.
And that gets into the Picasso essay too, of course.
Yeah, and I think, the two sort, and poetics is a tricky thing, right? Like
Yeah.
one of the great realities is I was able to co-teach a class at the University of Chicago about
Mm,
movement and skateboarding with two
that's awesome.
wonderful colleagues. But one of the things I realized there is that people come at this question of apoetics from all sorts of angles. So I should say that the two sort of real models that I had there was there's a very infamous 1972 article by a guy named Darko Suvin who wrote toward a poetics of the science fiction genre, and his task
Mm.
there was primarily to distinguish good science fiction from what he called the debilitating confectionery of most science fiction, right? It was basically a
Yeah.
qualitative, like distinguishing line that this is serious science fiction. This other stuff is just garbage genre fiction. He was trying to
Mm.
rescue the otherwise frivolous genre of science fiction and make it say like, hey, no, actually, there's some serious theoretical stuff going on in here. Which,
Sure.
by the time Alien comes out, everyone agrees like, oh, we can write doctoral theses about this.
Right,
And now
right. Yeah.
skateboarding is at that place where there are people who devote entire academic careers now to skateboarding, which is
Mm.
at once totally wild and long overdue. The other piece of writing was Gaston Bachelard's A Poetics of Space, which is really what you're talking about. That there is always this engagement, this interrogation of space that is going on because you're standing on this self-propelled platform that is at once a stage and also a vehicle that has ability to roll over, to grind on, to slide on, and to basically usurp the shapes of the world and reinterpret them as modes of engagement.
Yeah. And I love too how the board for you, I mean, at various points in the book becomes a stage, right?
Yeah.
It's like this sort of mini, really portable stage. And um there's a kind of an anarchy to the performance that's happening,
Hmm.
right? Not just like the anarchic kind of act of skateboarding, full stop,
Yeah.
but also like you're certainly, if we're gonna call skateboarding a performance, it's certainly not like a formalized situation like, yeah,
Right.
everyone watch. Like, in fact,
Right.
there's the watchers who are not in the know can be hostile.
Right.
um but yeah, we will get to that. It's a very kind of a cool formulation there. So like I really want to talk about one of my very favorite aspects of this book is that it's like it is like skateboarding investigation. It is also memoir qua memoir. Like it really is like you are writing about your life and some difficult things in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Difficulties in your marriage during the time of the pandemic, struggles with kind of like hero worship when you were younger.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, considered together, like the stories of your life, if we're just focusing really even on the marriage portion, the stories of your life as a husband and your life as a skateboarder actually suggest that marriage and skateboarding are quite alike.
Hmm.
There are things against time, against reason, against self-interest, determined only by love and fierce ongoing commitment. And I'm really curious if you can like maybe speak more about these similarities, if what you saw of them and how you saw like love informing
Yeah.
this book.
So the I think that the all of the answer for this starts with thinking of skateboarding as a practice, and I mean that in the
Mm,
sort of like Zen way of
yeah.
the repeated action, but importantly, the repeated action that is done attentively, right?
Mm,
It's not just a sort of naive or innocent repetition or ritual, that there is a central and important element, which is about attention to how one is doing it, why one is doing it, and so on. Um, Anyone who has been in any sort of marital discord knows that the basic question there is, well, why are we doing this? Like, what are we doing? And because my wife and I are childless or child free, however you want to frame it, the question for us was particularly acute. Like, why, right? We have no reason to
mm,
stay together aside from this mutual agreement that we will maintain this daily practice of being each other's spouses. So it's this sort of reciprocal, if not symmetrical, contract that one has to constantly reaffirm. Because if we're not doing this, there's really no reason for us to stay together, right? And again, part of this is deeply personal in that my wife and I are both super able people. We are independently solvent financially. We have no binding interest beyond the fact that we have decided to do this and be married. And so, that's it. And skateboarding is sort of that way too, that there's a suffering to it. I have a broken elbow right now. I have broken other hands. I have broken bodies. It gets in the way of me doing all these other things. And so there is this sort of abrasive reality that to be a skateboarder, especially as you age, really taps into.
mm,
So I guess for me, the basic question of why are we doing this? What is the reward of this? Should we continue doing this? Those questions ended up being really central to our practice of being married people. That the less attentive we were to the challenges of it and the rewards of it, the more it felt like we were doing the thing that people do, which is the same reason people get married, is because there's an idea of being married that pulls you into it, and it's like, okay, now you're married. So I guess the other real thing was it seemed to me, it seemed to us as we have gone through our version of marriage, which is now at 10 years, is like we need to be more attentive to what we're doing. We have to allow ourselves to interrogate, do we still want to be married? Does this still make sense to us? So we're not just going through with this willful kind of faith in the thing. Um,
Mhm.
so, what that says for love, I think, is that like, it's this bothness where love is at once a thing you don't choose, but if you would like it to continue to be fulfilling, if you do want it to not be this transitive sort of Raymond Carver version of, well, what's love if we can love one thing and then love something else? If you really do want to cultivate a love that lasts, it requires constant attention. It's a practice. It is not a substance. It is not a spell that is cast on you. It is a practice, and it requires both people to be upfront about what are we up to? What does it look like today? And that really like
Yeah.
daily, like when you wake up, your activity for the day is to be married. And that's your repetitive practice. What am I now as your partner? What do I need from you as my partner, et cetera, et cetera.
I love that too, and I see, and that is my experience, I
Mm.
think, of marriage in many ways as well. And I think like, it reminds me too of like sobriety, right? Which you
Mm.
actually
Hmm.
touch on vis-a-vis David
Hmm.
Foster Wallace, and how the kind of, these what I think are received by a lot of folks in 12 steps, and I can like again speak in personal experience here as homilies,
Yeah.
right? Of like, this is this sort of, you're choosing this surrender every day, right? Or you're
Hmm.
choosing this form of like being vulnerable or like being generous every day. Like these are actually like practices that can inform one's life, not just in like this sort of like wrist slapping puritanical sense, or not even in that sense, but in like a creative way, right? It's
Yeah.
like I don't just default to marriage, right?
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
it's a create the speech act. You are married creates the condition of marriage.
Right.
And I think the speech act of like, I'm sober, right? Or even like I am happy,
Yeah.
creates the condition of happiness. And the book, really shows this both vis-a-vis marriage and skateboarding.
Mm.
And actually, and like, let's do it. Are you ready to jump into Wallace? Let's jump into Wallace because there's a
Sure.
fantastic. Okay, cool. There's just such a fantastic essay in here about where you talk about David Foster Wallace and the really like kind of funny, scatological, and super funny, and it seems like quite brilliant skateboarding writer David Carney,
Yeah.
who I had not heard of or read before your description of him here, but it's that you have these two Davids kind of in your head in this essay, and I'm like, to when you approach this book, right? You can look at the title and say, okay, it is kind of, if I know you right, it is kind of invoking a little bit the cruise ship essay,
Hmm.
right? You could think of Wallace's writings on tennis, and kind of vis-a-vis your writings on skateboarding, and of course in the Carney Wallace essay, you talk about just this, right? You talk about the anxiety of influence and hero worship,
Yeah.
and I'm so curious actually to hear more of your thoughts about like how you like there's this really great scene where you and like Wallace are in the Pomona cafeteria circa
Mhm.
whatever,
Mhm.
2007 or something. And
Zero, 2000. Flat,
2000, oh,
2000,
okay, way okay.
2001. Yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
had just become the Roy Disney yada yada thing in
Yeah.
Pomona.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm so curious to hear, about your journey, right? From like that sort of that anxiety of influence place, that hero worship place, to the really sort of like intentional and creative place you find yourself in now.
Yeah. So I appreciate that question. The thing I should point out, so it was actually during the search committee for hiring that position, the Roy E. Disney position, now Letha
Oh man,
Heights.
it's so
So I was
funny.
a senior and I was not a creative writer. So I didn't start
Okay.
writing fiction until after college. So
Mm.
that I was even invited to the like immersive days. And it was very strange, like to look at back now, having had my own academic career, being in the midst of it.
Right.
Wallace is invited to be considered for this position, and so he leads a workshop of fiction writers, and then me, and then around the room, like it was a square table in the middle of the room, and then just sitting along the border of the room were all the faculty. So it was, which
Um,
seems to me radically fucked up. Like when I
Yes.
teach a workshop and a faculty, a colleague is coming to observe it or whatever, I first of all get the permission of every student, and I generally will say no, like, no, that's not what workshop is. And so there was this real performative element to it being a workshop and so on. The point being, I met David that day, and got to talk to him and got to find out that we were both double major. We were both born in Ithaca. Like we had all these totally like surface level connections that were sort of funny. And I had this moment of realizing that he actually was indeed a genius, like in engaging with
Mm,
him. And this sort of joke passes between us, and the quickness with which he responded and the way that his brain worked made me, as a, cocksure senior at an exclusive elite university in LA with my whole life in front of me, I was like, uh-oh, like that's what it actually looks like. Like what I am is a very watered down version of that. Like if I would like to think myself as a thing, I had better not think of myself as him. Um,
mm,
but all that came before I read the man's work, really, and was unsurprised to find, like a lot of people in my generation, that it was inspiring in a very particular way. And for me, that inspiration was less about being seen and less about having my particular anxieties appear on the page, and more about like, oh shit, this I find this to be extremely captivating fiction. This prose I find to be like just torrential in its amusement, that
mm,
I felt awash in entertainment energies that I had never really felt before from literature. And Wallace and Don DeLillo were the two people who did that for me. And so I was like,
mm.
forever
Yeah,
doomed. These are going to be my guys. So be it.
sure.
Um, so obviously, like I want to jump to this question of hero worship and how it ends. I mean, that's essentially the
Yeah.
origin. We don't have to really get into the middle because you can imagine what it looks like. It's trying to emulate their work, failing, and slowly finding one's own sort of work that taps into the same sort of something without doing it the same way the person does it, right? It's like a
Mm,
step remove. I don't write like DeLillo, but DeLillo remains the guy. If I pick up a page, if pick up a book and read a page, I will immediately have to set it down and go do my own work. Like that's useful. That's helpful.
yeah.
Wallace was someone who worked differently with me. Wallace was someone who literally paralyzed me. That anytime I taught his work and found myself speaking closely about his work, I was unable to generate my own work.
Yeah.
So that essay you see is about, on one hand, it's about the death of Wallace. It's also about the release of the Pale King, which is a very interesting object, more interesting as an object than it is as a novel.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out just what kind of writer I am, because I was deeply enmeshed at that point, or awash at that point in my own kind of struggle to write a second novel. And I was finding, though, that writing about skateboarding, writing nonfiction, particularly about skateboarding and treating skateboarding seriously, was very different than trying to write fiction. It was working. Um, and I didn't think of myself really as a nonfiction writer. I didn't think of myself as an essayist, but it did turn out that going this other path and looking at this thing that I loved, that it might have helped that like David wouldn't have loved it. David would have been like, I don't know, I can't do
Sure.
that. I can't stand on the thing. I mean, I can't imagine the guy
Can't
riding a
stand on
skateboard.
that.
So, part of it really was like this sort of
Yeah.
slow eject from this sort of, I don't know, gravitational pull of this planetary man. It was hard. It was artistically hard. Um, I don't know if that answers your question, except
It,
that, like, a lot of what skateboarding is sort of trained me for that. Like, a lot of what you do when you're an adolescent skateboarder is you idolize and also in a very real way, physically mimic the movements of your favorite skaters, right? Like when I think of what my arms do subconsciously when I'm riding a skateboard, mostly with my lower body, what my upper body does is almost to the inch a mimicry of what a particular skateboarder named Mike Carroll does, right? My wrists
mm,
do the same thing, my fingers do the same thing. All of these movements are emulative of this particular guy. So that sort of repetition and ritualistic approach to mimicry is a big part of, I think, both literary pursuits, of course, and also skateboarding.
oh, absolutely. I mean, I think what makes that what I feel like what made the Wallace essay so poignant for me um was like, my personal experience with Wallace was also feeling really sort of jazzed and energized by his writing, and feeling very spoken to by, in particular, the Gately and Cadenza, the
Yeah.
substance abuse stuff, but also feeling like, and I will actually use a real Franzen term here, feeling like I was the boy effulgence is the
Yeah.
Franzen term. The boy
Yeah.
effulgence was not intended for me, and it was not mine to have, and he's speaking to the effulgent boys and not to
Right.
me.
Right.
Yeah, and so kind of taking almost like a Talmudic approach and being like, well, fine, like I'll be the scholar here who gets everything right, while also sort of being on the outside and not feeling that, I'll put it this way, not feeling the anxiety of influence that I think a lot of really fantastic millennial writers of a certain age have felt, who are
Yeah.
men. And so I say all that to say that the way, even in my subject position, I still found like the way that you approached, um, uh, or rather, like, sort of like analogized, like wresting yourself free of this in the essay,
Mm.
was really like resonant to me too. Like you were like, I went skateboarding, right? And it was at a shitty park in
Yeah.
Peoria,
Right.
right? But sorry, my dog is trying to get into a chair. But it was at a shitty park in Peoria, but also like it, it's still like you found a way to kind of do just what you said, like find, like, approach your craft the way that you, Kyle Beachy,
Yeah.
would approach your craft, and I too cannot imagine the man in his bandana getting on
Right.
a skateboard, and that's great, and I'm delighted by that, right?
Yeah.
Like he has his tennis, and he has his. If we're going back to hierarchies and competition, there's not someone who believed more in
Yeah.
hierarchies than that
Right.
kind of brat pack of guys, and so
Right.
that's
Right.
why, yeah, that's why this is so appealing to me, is like you are like, and I will take the like Heraclitus route, and I will take the meandering route.
Yeah.
And what a great route it was.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, that makes me think of this language that, I mean, Franzen use it. Joshua Cohen uses it also when he's like this sort of, there's this way that Wallace readers, which means Wallace fans, if you in the discourse, which means bros, which means whiteness, which means masculinity, which means all of these things, now, is spoken of as this susceptibility, right? Like as if he were
Mm,
this con artist, right? That was really seducing his reader. And of course, Wallace used that language himself, and I think that's why that stuff sticks to him. I never felt seduced by Wallace. I never felt that I was susceptible to Wallace. I felt like what I saw in front of me was someone performing at an ability and with such elan and with such
yeah,
joy. What felt like joy on the page, even as it was writing about misery, was such like just carbonated like energy at all times, every sentence, that I wanted to make my own sentences. Like that really is
sure,
what it comes down to.
sure,
And so I do want to make sure that we're not just talking about this sort of Jordan Peterson's like Andrew Tate kind of
no,
captive, like there's the Pied Piper and then the sort of victims who fall into it. I don't know if that was really anyone's responsibility relationship with Walt. It's too hard. It's too hard to read for it to be really like, oops, I'm accidentally one of his devotees. I don't buy that. I think that sort of discourse is lazy. But I do want to say that um, it did require shifting my understanding of what I was capable of doing, right? And one of the things
mm,
that's great about skateboarding is that you always know what you're capable of doing. And, this gets us back into the poetics. It always pushes you to want to try something a little bit harder, right? Like
sure,
yoga, like playing a musical instrument, you always want to get better at it, right? It's not just I'm going to achieve this mastery and stay here. There is a built-in component of skateboarding which is pushing yourself to be a little bit better at it. Um,
yeah,
and yet at the same time, it's when one is afraid, if one thinks one can't do a thing, that one gets the most hurt, right? Like not
Mhm.
committing to trying a trick on a skateboard is a surefire way to really hurt yourself. Like if you don't go for it, you're going to kind of bail at some point on the thing and you're going to end up getting really hurt. Whereas if you go for it every time, you're going to get hurt in a less sort of dramatic way. All of which is to say, like, there is this very real overlap, maybe not coterminous, but it's close
Mhm.
in the making of sentences and the attempts at doing tricks, right?
Oh,
One can try to mimic a sentence, one can try to do a thing syntactically, but one is still always going to be limited by one's vocabulary and ability and philosophy and perception and ontology and experiences and all of these things. And so there was a really weird way that allowing skateboarding into my creative life in new ways allowed me to kind of free up some of the murk that was my commitment to here's what it means to be a writer. Here's what success
sure.
as a writer is. Here's how writing should look.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this, and then in fact, like, it kind of brings me to, the like novel and essay question that I wanted to ask too, because,
Mm.
so much of the most fun thing is about just that, right? It's about like, you know, I had I had to let go of this sense of rigidity about my marriage, right? Or
Yeah.
about my writing career, my teaching, whatever. And the kind of the path to that was this it's not a sport and a pastime. It is a pastime. It's
Mm.
this delightfully fun pastime that demands of its, I guess, practitioners, right? It's that because that's what's so great about skateboarding. It has practitioners. It is a craft. It is something that you get good at, but it's a
Yeah.
pastime. And it reserves this, like, it's this kind of incredible remit that like skateboarding occupies that so few things do. And so, like, you're saying to yourself, I'm gonna let go of this rigidity via this pastime that
Yeah.
demands one thing, and that's a lack of rigidity.
Mm.
One thing, being flexible, going for it,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
like and in fact you will, like, if you don't kind of go with the flow, if you don't sort of stay in the river, as it were,
Yeah.
yeah, you will get hurt, and
Yeah.
so it's an anti-rigidity practice. And then what I love about, the way you get at this in the book is you do bring in the process of writing that second novel.
Mm.
And it kind of makes me want to ask, like, you have your first novel, The Slide, right, which is very, like, it is very much a coming of age novel. I mean, it does have, like, and I
Yeah.
think in like a really delightful way, that kind of like a lot of the sort of DeLillo influence and fingerprints all over it. And it also talks about, though, a sense of anxiety, a sense of lack. And I'm so curious how, like, after you'd written the slide, right, and as you were writing this and kind of, realizing, or rather, as you were writing the skateboarding novel and realizing that it would be better as a series of essays, what was going on in your brain? Like, what were the decisions you made, and like, how did you make that leap from
Yeah.
novel to memoir?
Slowly and painfully, and with much like tertiary darkness, right? Like I
Yeah,
didn't. I
writing.
mean,
Yeah,
really, right. Really, the way it came about was a sort of like, well, fuck it. At some point, if I just keep writing these essays, eventually I'll have a book. As a sort of, you know, as a sort of, what's the word I want? The sort of like there's a word I'm not getting right now, maybe because I don't have coffee, but like a consolation prize. Like,
sure,
well,
sure.
I have to write these essays because if I don't write these essays, my fiction is going to be didactic and heavy-handed, which is all the things that like my early attempts at writing this novel were. I
Mm,
was trying to say things, which, as you know, trying to say something with a novel, with any sort of fiction prose, is a surefire way to kill it and like render it
exactly.
moot. Um, so, on one hand, it was like, well, I have to write these essays because it's going to free me up from all of these thoughts and saying things so that the novel can be the novel. And at the other hand, the novel was just like, it was just dying. It was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but it was written for me, right? There was no audience there
Mm,
for it. So really there was a real and you've experienced this, and you sort of, I would love to hear you speak about this. I mean, the fear of when the fear when you publish one book of thinking that's going to be my only thing, like
Oh,
that's it.
sure,
I did it. I did
sure.
the thing. And so throughout the basically the decade between 2009 and when this book sold in 2020 or whatever, 2019, I was really afraid that I had written my fiction and that I had gotten it out of me and I couldn't do anything else. Um, so this book ended up being a kind of life raft. It ended
Mhm.
up ultimately really clearing the system of all of these thoughts so that long after it was started, I do have now a manuscript of the novel that is very,
Yeah.
very loosely related to the original thing in 2010. Very, very different, but does seem to me to, for the first time in its development, stand as a book. Like, I think it's a novel. I think it's a novel, and I think I did it. I think. Um, my agent is gonna hopefully sell it. But if she doesn't, I know now I've like wrote the novel. I wrote the novel. Like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
novel is done. I can finally move on from it because it did feel to me like I can't really do anything else big until I finish this thing. Um,
sure.
but do you have that? I mean, you finished the Come Down, and then very quickly it was another novel and then a short story collection. So, how does that tie into your sort of feeling of that post first book? Doubt. Did you experience that in the same way I'm describing, or was yours just kind of like I'm just going to keep cranking and trust what I have?
Oh, it's a good question. I would say I did and didn't experience it in the same way you did. So my like with my first novel, I mean, it's just going to happen pretty much no matter what, right? And I didn't realize that. But there was this kind of like spiritual anorexia where, the same way that like the anorexic can never be thin enough, I was never going to be successful.
Right.
And these feelings about like I had kind of preordained this for myself, right? Like, outside of insane, just wild, just like random, you blew up by viral word of mouth kind of
Mm,
quote unquote success. Outside of that, nothing would be enough. And so my first novel, the experience of that was for me was very, very much an experience of failure, quote unquote, and self-criticism and just endless goalpost moving and
right.
endless living my life for kind of for other people. And so I think like kind of the short answer here, but there's a lot to say, but I'll kind of abridge it. Is like I for a long time writing fiction was the only place I allowed myself to have fun, to have a
Mm,
sense of sort of like so like is that kind of like anarchic sort of I'm gonna go with it, I'm gonna see what happens was really like cordoned off and localized entirely in my like fiction writing practice. And that had started to get colonized by these senses of like expectation and like, well, you need to write the fucking book
right.
that's going to yada yada, whatever,
Right.
make you a
Right.
loser. And so there was a kind of a blend of that, those like really, like Sturm und Drangy kind of emotions that I went into my writing with, and I ended up producing the stories for Bugsy, and needing to write a novel to sell them, and so Confidence was the novel that I ended up working on, and it was like I was happy to like have those land with someone who really cared about them, but man, I'll tell you, Kyle, it was like there's just not like you've and then we talked about this in our conversation before this interview, but like I started to wake up to the fact that like the goalpost would just keep moving. If I kept approaching this to go actually back to like sort of the skateboarding metaphor here, if I kept approaching publishing like fucking competitive diving,
Right.
it like eventually the curtain was gonna close for me. Eventually
Right.
something brutal was gonna happen for me.
Right.
But if I took the more kind of fun and stochastic and silly and playful skateboarding approach, and it's a craft at which I can't possibly win, and I can't possibly achieve a perfect dot because there is no quantification, then yeah, then my love, for writing is going to be something that I'll be able to retain and I'll be able to, and so that was actually a lesson that I learned kind of post or like during and post the publication of Confidence in Bugsy. And yeah, I would say like me now versus, me with the publication of the Come Down, completely different people, completely different approach.
Do you think, I mean, because for me, I mean, everything you're saying sounds familiar, and I imagine for anyone who's hearing this who is a writer who has published, it sounds familiar. For anyone who hasn't published, it sounds like bullshit because anyone who hasn't published thinks that that publishing as an end is going to probably change things. Though
That's the
hopefully
goalpost.
that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, essentially what you see in the most fun thing is me trying to align my writing practice to be more like my skateboarding practice, right? That's the sort of the
Yeah.
long and short of it is here's this thing I do without all of these poisoned, impossible sort of benchmarks that are driving me, like literally driving me into the closest I've ever felt to like true darkness. Like my
Yeah.
life is one that
So,
has been very, very blessed. So why is it that this thing I've chosen to do with my time? Why do I keep doing this thing writing that makes me so miserable? Like what am I
sure.
doing? What is this gluttony? What sort of like punishment am I acting out or whatever? Do you think it's possible to do that without a second thing, without some other thing, without a person having something else in their lives that they can say, wait a minute, writing should be more like this? Because for me, I really do think that's the only way it happened was I had this other model and I was attentive enough to my practice of it that I realized, oh,
Yeah.
here I don't feel that. Here I feel this totally other thing. Here my relationship with performance is actually healthy and energizing rather than deflating and darkening and all of the things that writing for much of my life has been. Do you think that can happen without the other thing?
Oh, absolutely. It just depends. I mean, I think like that's the way that those things sort of like fit together for you,
Yeah.
right? But it's like, I mean, it is of course it is kind of an individual situation, right? Like for me, here's how it worked for me. Um, writing, the show of writing, right? Like to borrow a Wallace term, like the only way I was able to sort of like break, kind of like shake loose those bonds was through having, I mean, I hate to say it, but it's kind of like it's like a ghost of Christmas future.
Mm,
There's a lot of sort of like kind of personal travails, misadventures that kind of intervene in my life. Not many related to substance abuse issues, but not all of them. And that were like, dude, listen,
yeah.
if you hold these beliefs and you continue to treat them as accurate representations of the world, here's what will happen.
Right.
Do you want that? And
Right.
so, I think it's like so for me then it was like I went from like writing as a discipline and being like drained of the play to Ghost of Christmas Future to writing as play again. And
Yeah.
then I think like for you, right, it's like skateboarding was the sort of had that kind of contrapuntal role.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know, kind of like right, like there are people for whom it's like my daily life feels like a total drudgery, and then I have this near death experience on a commercial flight, and now like I've been experiencing joy in like trimming the lawn, right? Or
Right.
it's like
Right.
I am a professional athlete and I, like thank God I can like go home and like play the kazoo. Like
Right.
there's all different ways to kind of plug in to
Right.
this, and yeah, so like do you need the second thing? I would say yes, but the second thing needn't be a different practice. It can
Right.
be an
Right.
experience, an idea, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
important. I think maybe just to touch on Wallace again, like, one of the things that I think you and I have kind of tossed back and forth over text along the way is um, this Lamont Chu example, right?
Mm,
The big question of fame, the big question of
mm,
like not feeling adored enough, not feeling celebrated enough, right? Which is the ultimate trap. Like, oh,
Ugh.
my work
Yeah.
is underappreciated and so on. And
Such a
one
trap.
of the
Such a trap.
right, and one doesn't want to instrumentalize another person's life. But at the same time, that's what a story is. A story is a sort of um, a framework that takes a life and reduces it into some sort of meaning. And I think one way of instrumentalizing and reducing the life of David Foster Wallace, whether the person or the idea, is that this is a person for whom um, radical aesthetic success was never enough. That having written the sentences he has and the texts he has, it was not enough. And so just at a basic level to see someone who is operating at the peak of their abilities or beyond your own abilities not find reward in the very thing you're trying to find reward in, there would have to be a great firewall there to not take that as a kind of lesson. That's
It
just
absolutely.
so I think
Yeah.
I think for a very particular kind of writer, there was a sort of wake up call in Wallace's life and death.
Well, yeah, and I think, like with Wallace, and I know we spoke about a little bit about the Alice Monroe situation
Right, sure.
before the interview. Yeah, it's like there's for me, like, there is such it felt very easy to lionize them and figures like them, and then to go through an MFA program where no one's saying it, but everyone's saying it, thinking it, right? And saying it through gestures and, that you are nothing, right? If you are in fact not a writer, unless you sort of achieving this kind of like, yeah, it's just like difficult to define exactly, but, broadly understood as meteoric success and claim and adoration. And, for me, situations like Wallace's, right, are like the model is addiction, and the model is the external locus of control. It's just never gonna, you will never get there. You'll
Yeah,
never get there. You'll never be able to sit back on your laurels and go, ah, finally, the MacArthur Grant solved. The
right,
MacArthur Grant makes me never want to drink Hennessy. It's the
right.
MacArthur Genius Grant. Like, that's bullshit. No one's ever said that.
Right,
And like, oh, my best-selling book makes me not, like, I'm no longer a sex addict now, right? Like,
right.
that's not a thing. And so I think that, yeah, like, that was when I was in a position where, I had these external locus of control governing my life, like seeking whatever approval for or acclaim, or, kind of loosely defined for my writing, or seeking
Hmm.
a substance or something, right? It was it was quite dark.
Yeah,
Just like you said, it was the closest I think I too have been to a really sort of a total darkness. And Wallace, yeah, I hate to describe someone's life as an object lesson, but I think the kind of like mythological or dream version that does not map onto the
yeah,
man's life, I think is an object.
yeah,
I think you're right.
yeah.
Um, yeah. Well, and actually, let me do a little ollie. Let me do a half pipe grind here, and like off of that topic. I know. I'm just gonna bounce off that topic actually, because I do have another question for you that it ties into the Wallace stuff, but it takes us in a different direction, which is like the concept of masculinity too, because I know this has
Mm.
kind of come up for us throughout the interview. And of course, yeah, it comes up in relation to Wallace, but the way that like one really cool thing about reading this book is I get to meet a lot of really unusual personalities, which is like why I love reading gonzo journalism, reading
Mhm.
just good long form of any sort. And the most fun thing introduces us to some very eccentric skaters, in various states of emotional
Mhm.
disarray or acceptability or whatever. And you talk about, right, like some of these guys are just so totally lovable. Talk about the sort of the Dylan Reader phenomenon, the young kid, then and what's his first name? Nija?
Nija Houston.
Nija, yeah, Nija Houston, who is of course not a young kid anymore, but you talk about the Nija Houstons, the Dylan Readers. You also talk
Mhm.
about skaters who have just said some off the wall, really offensive,
Mhm.
and very kind of openly, like racist or sexist things. And I think like as you're writing about these guys, right? You're kind of finding your way into um uh just like different masculinities and like what being a man means and what being a straight man means. And I think like to your point about the like Wallace seduces white dudes like Andrew Tate, like that's not I agree with you, that's not a thing
Yeah,
at
yeah.
all. Wallace, like I actually think that like you know I know the phrase masculinity crisis is such a tedious phrase to use right now, but I actually do like believe that there are very few places for men, right? To like go and talk about being men, to go and talk about being straight men, to go and talk about
Yeah.
like, a lot of the stuff that, is I think would be dismissed in center left and not to mention far left circles as like, oh, patriarchal and like
Yeah.
tedious conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, these are like necessary conversations, and I think you kind of start to get at a lot of them through these profiles of skaters. So yeah, can you talk more about
Yeah, yeah. I think maybe the best way to access this, in as much as this is an answer, is to say that the years that I wrote this book, the decade that this book kind of covers, is the decade when skateboarding achieved a new kind of inclusivity, right? Like we talked earlier
that?
about skateboarding being exclusive. For a long time, the one of those big lines of exclusivity was along the lines of gender and sexuality.
Sure.
There are some very famous people in the history of skateboarding who were outcast or blacklisted for being gay. And
Mm,
so, starting around 2010 and going really into where we are now, queerness became a central, like not only like, oh, we should be inclusive of gay men, but queerness more broadly now is pretty much understood as a central conceit or a core value of skateboarding, right?
mm,
Um,
yeah.
Someone had a thing on Blue Sky the other day, which was like, cis straight guys, like, how did you get introduced to trans issues? And my answer was like, oh, skateboarding. Like,
Mm,
factually, when it comes down to it, there were a couple very notable trans skaters who essentially shattered the expectation of the industry by saying, like, actually, I embody everything that you claim to be about. So how dare you say
mm,
I can't be part of this, right? Like, the
interesting. Yeah.
ethos of skating is so rooted and so spiritually defined that when these rebellious, subversive, gender queering skaters showed up, they're like, you can't kick us out. Like, if
Yeah.
you claim to
Yeah.
like these things, you have to let us be part of it. And that little bit of attentiveness reflected back on skateboarding, where even the oldest, most grizzled gray hair guys had to say, fuck, you're right. Come on in.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
so I do think I mean I could put this out there. I think that skateboarding is a pro-social activity. I think that the communities that are created even at the skate park as a sort of facsimile of the real world, the ways that skateboarding requires audience and requires interaction between skaters means that it is a fundamentally and radically pro-social activity. Um,
Mm,
in the past 15 years, it has also become a far more diverse activity on
mm,
racial lines, on gender line, across the board, internationally, right? Like in
mhm.
2010, it still remained sort of America's thing. It's not America's thing anymore. The coolest skaters in the world are in Denmark. Like, end of
Nice.
story.
Yeah.
And they're rad. The
Yeah.
the other coolest skaters in the world are a DIY upstart community in Ethiopia, right? So like,
Cool.
so does skate, I mean, yes, there is a potential alternative masculinity contained in skateboarding. And I think what it requires, though, to just back us up or close the loop a little bit, is being more overt about what skateboarding is, right? Like,
Mm,
I don't think there's a skater alive who I have heard say that something is gay or call himself in a self-excoriating way, call himself fag, like which you'll see, like, oh, I'm being such a pussy. I'm being, there is not
Right.
a male skater alive who I wouldn't feel comfortable being like, hey man, don't fucking say that. Don't say
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Because skateboarding is a process of constant correction, we correct each other. We self-coach each other. We extend these kind of communique that I think out in the world people are very frightened to say. So there is an
Mm,
ontological reality here that when you were in the ontology of a skateboard community, there are lines of communication that we just haven't yet normalized outside of that. Um,
yeah.
and I think there's a lot of reasons for it. I think more than reasons though for it, what's maybe interesting is how can we apply that? Because there is a real model that remains in skateboarding of mentorship, and there is a responsibility I feel as a 40-year-old skater where I don't care if these kids at the park think I'm like old and uncool. I know that I have some authority because I've been doing this thing longer than they do. And I feel
Yeah.
comfortable tapping into that authority and correcting them and like flicking them on the head and being like, don't fucking say it. Don't say that. Here's what happens when you say that. You're being a kook.
Mm,
You are being a non-skater. And
mm,
so, that circles us back to, well, we have to define what those skaterly values are that we're all sort of subscribing to without really thinking about them. And what we see is that there is a radical kind of inclusivity here. There is a radical non-normativity. There is a
yep.
radical curiosity in how can this thing that exists be made some other way? And, that starts with this is a bench. Actually, no, you shouldn't sit on it. You should jump up onto it and grind along the side of it. So if we
Yeah.
can do that, certainly we can say like, oh, this interaction between two people is kind of silent. Well, what if one of these people was more open and said like, hey, do you want help? Or like, hey, can I
Yeah.
help? Hey, can I be of
Yeah.
assistance? Right? Like, I've seen, there's some radical activists in the skateboarding world who I have seen pretty single-handedly. I bring her up almost every time I can. Her name is Kristen Ebeling, and I have never learned
Mm,
more about activism or teaching than I have from the way that this woman goes about basically saying like, "Hey, that's mansplaining. Like what you're doing right now.
mm,
I didn't ask for your help.
yep.
I don't want
Yeah.
it." And so like
Yeah.
we were able to
I love
have these
that.
conversations in skateboarding that seem to be really hard for whatever reason to have in the broader world.
Yeah. Oh, that's phenomenal.
It's
Wow.
it's frustrating because it's like, oh, where are the people in the world who are going and flicking Andrew Tate on the head and being like, hey, you little fucking twerp, don't do that. Like, like where are those people? And the answer is those people are trying to make money off him also, I guess, is the answer.
Well, but I mean, Andrew Tate aside, right? And I think it always feels good to push Andrew Tate aside. I think it's you know,
Yeah.
I think it's like what a phenomenal and positive thing, among many about skateboarding that it creates it really actually it creates not just this sort of like kinetic space, but this discursive space as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where like assumptions about a bench are challenged, and so are assumptions about, like sex and gender.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool. That's really cool. I want to end on a note of fun to that end
Yeah.
because your book is about fun, right?
Hmm.
This conversation.
Nominally, it's about fun anyway, right?
It's nominally about fun. I think it's substantively about fun as well. I had a lot of fun reading, so there's that as well. But what we're talking, I think, about this really, really important shift that at least I feel it seems like you do as well, that one must make in one's writing life and one's creative life, away from the goalposts,
Mm,
away from the spiritual anorexia, and towards fun. And a lot of, I think, the folks who, I think it's safe to say, pretty much most of the folks who subscribe to the Substack are interested in writing.
yeah.
Um, and so, what advice would you have, Kyle, for making that shift and approaching one's writing as fun, or finding the fun again in it?
Yeah. I think it's about maintenance, right? I mean, I think
Mm,
this is where the sort of model of the practice becomes so important. You know, what this book shouldn't do is signal that I have achieved a new kind of enlightenment where I write now and I'm free the sort of constraints and expectations. I mean, that's not true. I mean,
Sure.
it is a battle that I continue to fight. I think I'm more equipped for that battle than I was before. And likewise, everything I just said about skateboarding, it is not a utopia. There remain there challenges. It's just that I think skateboarding has embraced the conversation in such a way that it's able to address some of the squeaky hinges and lingering misanthropes and all of the terrible people who remain in skateboarding, right? So it's not perfect. Nothing is ever done. And maybe
Mhm.
that's it. Like it's never done. Like whatever project you've wrapped up and sent off to your agent, you're not done. Um,
Mm.
and so I think it's just an embracing of that fact that it's not about a deliverable. It's not
Mm.
about a finish line, that actually what it is the life. I mean, the thing I found really useful, and I try to teach this a little bit late in my university career, and I think it's much more central to my conversations now outside of academia in classrooms, is that like the literary life, like what it means to live a literary life. It's not that you're a writer who publishes a lot of books, it's that you engage with reading and you engage with writing, that you believe this is a worthwhile kind of venue or milieu to be part of, that you want to be in there. Um,
Mm.
and doing it by choice. And again, getting back to that question of constant interrogation and constant checking in, what attention does is I think Sigrid Nunez is so wonderful about this in The Friend. Did you read The Friend before it became a movie?
Sadly, I did not read The Friend.
I
No.
mean, The Friend is
Somebody
a
to
lot
read.
of things in addition to having the best ending maybe of any novel I've read in years. It does a really good job of this question of like, is it okay to stop being a writer, to step away from that?
Of
And the answer has to be, of course, yes.
course,
Um,
yeah.
and just like, is it okay for us to dissolve this marriage and go our separate ways? The answer has to be yes. Is it okay for me to go 6 months not being a skateboarder? Am I going to still have an identity if I don't do this? The answer has to be yes, or else I'm doomed, or else I'm a slave to a thing. I am subservient to a force that I can't control. So, long answer, that short answer, like I think it's about really finding pleasure in the process. Like the
Yeah.
literary life is this. It's being able to talk to you about this. It's not waiting to hear from my agent, which is not literature. That's
No.
publishing. It's this other
That's
thing.
commerce. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So I think just sort of defining the parameters of what the life is. Is it this? Is it reading? Is it writing? Is it going to readings? Is it buying from small bookstores? Like those things can feel like they're serving the purpose, which is to be a writer, but actually those things are that's what it is to be a writer. That's what it is to be a literary person, and we need more of that.
Oof, gosh, I so agree. And to kind of like snatch a metaphor from earlier in this conversation, it's like the difference between clay and polyurethane, right? Like
Mm,
if you are like if you really have a system of belief that's like that says I don't skate for 6 months, therefore I cease to be a skater.
hmm
That's you're gonna break like a clay wheel. You want to be durable like polyurethane. You want the identity to like it's like it. This is all part like being human is a various and a variegated and kind of like long term experience.
Yeah.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so are the parts of being human. Therefore, like being a skater, like being a writer. So
Yep.
like let it be durable. Let it be emergent. And I mean, I really vibe with that. And I think also like, you know, one really important thing about like being in the river, I guess you could call it. It's a very good therapist I called it. Is that like, yeah, the answer to will we dissolve this marriage, like, rather, is it okay if we dissolve this marriage has to be yes.
Right.
And I've experienced that as well with like so much major stuff in my life, including, like an engagement, including you know, publishing or writing, right? Like, is it okay? Am I still me if this book doesn't, I don't know, become a bestseller or whatever ridiculous standard I had? the answer has to be the answer has to be that the external does not determine
Yeah.
the internal.
Yeah.
And that's what frees us up to do this, right?
Mm.
That's what keeps us from like obsessing over the perfect dive. And I think and that's what's going to save a lot of folks from, from traveling the Wallace route, right?
Yeah.
Like and yeah, it's that I think is the piece of advice that you gave there, like be flexible, be okay with how you are.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah. And it's, the danger of all this is we're just walking a line right along the pat, right? Like one thing that's amazing about skaters is they are uncomfortable ever. You will always find a skater saying like, I know it's cliche, but, right? Like
mhm.
this need to show like, oh, I know what we're saying is cliche. Like it really does come down to like I really fully believe that one has to embrace the obvious. Like one has to the second
Yes, yeah.
you disregard the obvious or the pat or the trope thing, you're doomed. Um, because it's actually very, very simple. Like all of this
Yeah.
stuff is extremely simple. And the simplicity is stuff that we know, but we are suspicious of, I think, particularly in a post 1972 ironic age, we are cynical and we are suspicious about anything that feels too clear or simple. And I think a lot of what my life has been circling around to allow myself permission to let the incredibly fundamentally obvious thing actually guide me.
So I love that. And I think that's the note I want to end on. Everyone, please buy this book. Buy The Most Fun Thing by Kyle Beachy. Read this book. Thank you, Kyle, so much for gracing the Podstack.
Oh my God, thank you so much for having me. This has been a total joy.
Same, same. And yeah, I'm looking forward, to hearing from all you listeners, viewers, readers, whatever, about how much you enjoyed Kyle's book. And stay tuned for the next episode.